Hi there, guys. I can see we're getting some participants coming in now for our webinar set to start. My name is Matt Brown. I'm the CRO here at Starboard, and joining me presenting is Moritz Lehmann, Dr. Moritz Lehmann, one of our senior oceanographers and scientists here at Starboard. And we will be starting the presentation shortly. You can see there's a couple more people kind of adding themselves in. So we'll kick off in a second with some housekeeping and overview of how we're going to run the session today. Great. So as we've got more people coming in, just thought we'd go through a bit of housekeeping and an overview of how we're going to run the session. So the big thing for us is that we really want it to be as interactive as possible. We're really keen on an engaging conversation around this topic. So please do type your questions into the Q&A box as you think of them throughout the webinar. We'll have a short presentation and then demonstration during the webinar itself, and then we've actually allowed quite a good block of time at the end to go through some of those questions and deal with some of the answers and discussion at the end of the presentation. So don't worry if you haven't had your question answered as we kind of go through things. We'll gather them all together and then really do a bit of a deep dive into those questions at the end. You'll also see when you're putting in your questions that you can keep yourself anonymous as you go through it. So yeah, more than happy for anonymous questions to come in. The idea for us is that we really get as much engagement as possible and a chance to discuss what is a really exciting and complex topic. And thank you very much for that. Cool. So it looks like we've got a bulk of the participants who have signed up already in. And so, yeah, we'll kick off. So thank you for joining us again. Thank you for making time. As I mentioned, we're going to look at, in particular, the dangers of oversimplifying IUU risk. And we've really focused around this topic in terms of fishing. And the reason we've done that, it's a complex and varied problem. It's a global problem, but it's a global problem with local variance. And so, while there are some commonalities in terms of risk factors involved with IUU fishing, there is a real difference in how those are applied and where they're more prevalent than others. For example, where underreporting is the biggest challenge in the Pacific, potentially, other areas have greater issues with non-licensed and potentially dark vessels. And I guess what we've seen in conversations with in market as Starboard over the last few years is we've seen a couple of really strong desires come through from the conversations that we're having. One, a real need or a desire for a simple solution which concretely labels a vessel as IUU fishing, and that's the one to go after, or that actually it's simply just dark vessels that are the problem, and it's dark vessels that are stealing all the fish. And I guess from our point of view, we feel that the reality is that actually that's quite an oversimplification of what is really a very complex problem. And what we know to be true and consistent is that there are just too many vessels to inspect them all. And so with limited resources, analysts, RFMOs, enforcement agencies are looking to make informed decisions about which vessels to board and inspect on the high seas, or to inspect when they come back into port. And to inform and prioritize those inspections, we're doing a lot of work here at Starboard on risk indicators. Now, these indicators are built on the latest literature on the topic, and also through our work and conversation with leading analysts across the globe. Today, as we go through the webinar, we'll touch on some of those risk indicators. We'll talk about some of the examples across the Pacific, particularly in the WCPFC, and then where we're next really heading with risk indicators. This discussion and all of the conversation and questions and insights that you can provide as we go through this webinar is going to help us to inform where we need to take this work and where we are going with it. So as I already mentioned, please just fire in your questions as we go along, and we'll look to answer those at the end of the Q&A session. Great. So in terms of risk indicators and risk factors, as I mentioned, we're focused on fishing, and we've really been looking at risk indicators for years from two clear kind of angles. One, really trying to understand risk, learning patterns of behavior, looking at real world examples, learning from published studies such as Ford and Wilcox 2022, which you would have seen referenced in the case study about Operation Nasse that we sent out as part of this webinar, and also through conversations, as I mentioned, with expert analysts across the globe, particularly in the Pacific. We've also then built a database within Starboard of years of events, which is logging things like fishing activity, AIS data gaps, encounters, port visits, and anomalous movements for all vessels on AIS globally. And so a big sort of work and project that we're doing at the moment is actually combining those two streams of work to more clearly highlight risk indicators within the Starboard platform and allow analysts to work with them in really sophisticated ways. And I guess what we've done here in purposes of this discussion is group these factors or these risk indicators into main buckets you can see on screen here. So things like vessel behaviours, i.e. their high seas transhipment events and a vessel's history and activity, licensing information, example, is a vessel behaving as per its licensing conditions? Is it licensed to be in the area and fishing? Which is obviously, the clearest example of the I in IUU fishing. If a vessel's breaking its licensing conditions, then it's clearly fishing illegally. And recently we had some success in seeing an example of that with the FAD deployment activity of the Sunflower 7, which is an article and a case study that we've got that we can share if you haven't already seen it, where a vessel was actually not licensed for fishing activity, was found to be, by its behaviour, looking to be dropping off FADs and contravention to its licensing. Authorities were informed, and then the Thai Fisheries Department were able to not only inspect, but actually turn that vessel away from offloading in port. So yeah, you can see this combination of behaviour plus actual assessment in terms of illegalities. Also, factors like economic and environmental factors. Does this vessel appear to be travelling further since its last port to fishing grounds compared to others in the fleet or others in that same area? Does it appear to be deliberately transshipping on the high seas, or potentially even leaving fishing grounds and fishing activity to travel further away for an encounter or transshipment event with a fish carrier than the distance from the local port, which could support the activity? So all of these are indicators of potentially uneconomic behaviour, and indicators of where you can see more fuel usage, and potentially what is the driving force behind this behaviour. That questions can be asked based on some economic factors, as well as clear violations such as vessels that have either been previously listed for IUU offences or prosecutions, or from an ownership structure and network perspective, are they linked by relationships to other vessels who are known bad actors, say on global IUU watch lists, or potentially linked to vessels or owners that are on sanction lists, like we've seen previously with the Dalian Ocean Fishing Company, as an example. If we move on, and I mentioned at the top of the meeting, we're going to be looking into the Pacific, and particularly the WCPFC, and off the back of the published article around the Operation Nasse case study, you can see here immediately on screen the challenge faced during that annual multilateral operation. The number of vessels, the size of the area, and the real need for ability to prioritise and efficiently distribute resources in terms of assets, in terms of time and inspection time, effectively, onto vessels during that operation. So, what we're using here, what we're going to talk to in more detail, how those risk indicators actually provide some guidance in terms of vessels to inspect and vessels of interest, combining that then with expert analysis and then additional data sources to really focus efforts and increase chances of success, both during operations and day-to-day MCS activities. I'm now going to hand over to Maritz, who's going to talk through Operation Nasse in a bit more detail, and also go into the actual demo and visualization of the activity itself.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Matt. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night to all the participants. Thank you very much for attending. Like Matt said, we've been looking at IUU risk indicators, and the general notion is that IUU risk indicators are indications of IUU behavior that are found throughout the world ocean. However, in detail, we have to determine what IUU risk indicators are relevant for the area of interest that we're working with. And in our case here for the Operation Nasse, and for much of our work at Starboard, we're looking at the Pacific Ocean, and in particular, the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. The regional fisheries management organization that is looking after this ocean is the WCPFC, or the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. And it's a very active and very effective fisheries management organization, and it has a large number of member states. It has participating territories and cooperating non-members. And these members have agreed to a number of conservation and management measures that apply and that are setting binding rules for behavior and activities inside this convention area. And that applies to the exclusive economic zones and the high seas. And so these conservation management measures, or CMMs, are really key for us to interpret the IUU risk indicators with respect to actual IUU behavior. And some of the important risk indicator CMMs here from the Commission pertain, for example, to shark finning, Shark finning in itself, just taking the fins off and discarding the carcass of the shark is illegal. And so sharks and their fins have to be associated and identified on board. Seabird bycatch has to be mitigated, and this is done by setting some deterrent lines. They're called Tory lines. And catch and effort have to be reported on a daily basis. Also a resolution, not a CMM, but a resolution is that labor standards are upheld on these ships. So when we're talking about looking for infringements to these CMMs, we're looking for risk indicators that may suggest any of those infringements. Now, just as a quick overview to introduce the fishery we're dealing with here, realize that we have registrants and attendees from all over the world, and this may be not your area of work here. So the Western and Central Pacific, the fishery out there is primarily for tuna, and the area of the Operation Nasse is primarily yellowfin, albacore, and big eye tuna cod. The fishery that is most dominant on the high seas is a longline fishery, and these are conducted by relatively large vessels. So they're 50 to 60 meters long. Here's an example on the screen of one of those ships. They're large, 500 tons gross registered weight, and they have about 30 crew. The size of ship means that these vessels have mandatory requirement to carry AIS, so the Automated Identification System from the International Maritime Organization. It's mandatory that vessels over 300 tons carry these identification beacons and transmit their position all the time. These ships are at sea for several months, often a year, and in several cases even more than 1 year, several years. They carry buoys, as you can see here in a little diagram, that when fishing activity starts, the fishing line is spun between buoys that are thrown overboard, and these buoys have a radio beacon or an AIS beacon on them. So these AIS beacons are sometimes used just as a cheap geolocation transponder. They do allow us to see what's going on, how this fishing behavior looks like. I'm just going to switch over into the Starboard platform, and what you can see here is an area of the Pacific Ocean. I'll zoom out in a minute, but for now, it shows the track of one longliner vessel and also 6 of its buoys. In this green, there's a scale bar at the top. Here is 10 kilometers along this little box. The geolocation is shown in small print underneath. So we're just 35 degrees south of the equator and 173 degrees west. We've set this the time window of this plot to 2 weeks at the end of June, and the bottom here shows the time slider in which I can move to animate the vessels on the screen, and as I'm going to do that just right now. So as time goes on, the ship drives a certain course and drops off these longliner AIS-equipped buoys. It then takes a little time to let the fish find the hooks and returns along a path to collect the lines and the fish on them, and repeats this over and over again. Just zooming out a little bit shows that this activity just keeps on going. For reference, here's a measurement circle. So in about 2 weeks, a space of perhaps 350 kilometers or 280 nautical miles can be covered easily, and this is fairly typical behavior that we see in this part of the world. I'll now zoom out a little bit, and I'm just going to change to a separate screen. We're still looking at the same time period and in the same area. So the ship that we looked at was was one of those here. But this is the general activity of longliners in the Operation Nasse area. So the Operation Nasse area is the one that's delineated here with this darker dark gray line. So this is the high seas area, and the lines that you see on the screen are longliner fishing activities over those 2 weeks. Red lines or pink lines indicate actual fishing activity as determined by our fishing classifier, and a screen like this just really kind of shows what task an analyst and an operation team has to deal with in terms of the numbers of boats. So there are 116 vessels, longliners, on this screen. And I'm just going to, for general situational awareness, toggle flag states on and off. So most of these 116 are Taiwanese longlining vessels. So if I turn them off, you can see that they're all over this area, including part of the area to the south. There's a number of Chinese longlining vessels that are here, operating smack in the center of the operational area, and a bunch of Vanuatu flagged longliner vessels that are congregated here to the south of the area, and 9 Japanese and 9 Fiji flagged vessels as well. Now, interestingly, looking at the flag states means that China and Taiwan are a long way away. So right off the bat, these are long distance vessel fleets, long distance fishing activity that travel 10,000 miles or so to get from their port to the fishing area. Now, on first sight, Vanuatu doesn't seem to be that far away. However, looking at some of the Vanuatu vessels here, just going to select a different screen. It's the same time and the same area, but I've just picked out one vessel that was a little difficult to find just because all the lines look exactly the same. So here's a vessel, the Darwin, for example, is one of the Vanuatu longliners here. And I'm now restricting the view just to Vanuatu longliners. And in order to find out more about this longliner, we have linked the information from the WCPFC register of vessels into Starboard. And the information shows up here. So this analysis or this vessel information panel shows some of the fundamental basic information on that vessel. And if you wanted to find out more details, you can just click on this link and the WCPFC record will show up. So it shows that this vessel is authorized to fish in this area. And it has a bunch of authorization numbers here and registration numbers. And it shows the vessel type, the tuna longliner, its IMO number, and vessel characteristics. And further down here, we can see the ownership and personnel detail. So in this case, here's the owner name, Darwin Fishery Company, registered in Vanuatu. But the master name, Song Wei Wu, is of Chinese nationality. So there's a mismatch here between the flag that the vessel flies and the nationality of the master. And that's another IUU risk indicator that is flagged for further analysis. I'm just going to quickly jump out of Starboard and show the Standard & Poor's Maritime Risk Intelligence Suite, the entry for the Darwin Fishery Company, just so that we can show a different type of information that analysts have to refer to in order to get a more complete picture of what's going on in the area. And here it says that this company has only one chartered in ship. And so it's a sort of a one ship shop, and checking into many of the other ships, the Vanuatu flagged vessels in that area, shows that each of the vessel has an owning company in Vanuatu that only owns this one ship. So it is very likely that there is a beneficial owner in China that owns several of these vessels. And so what this indicates here is that Vanuatu is the flag of convenience for this vessel. And this is the screen I was on. So we have another risk indicator here, the flag of convenience. Flags of convenience are being used to escape regulatory oversight in the country, in the nation of the beneficial owner, so it's the risk indicator that we note here. Now, looking at these Vanuatu flagged vessels over the years, we notice that the location where they fish repeats from year to year. So in 2021, the same vessels were fishing in the same area, and in 2022, the same happened. So I'm just jumping over to 2022 here. The time span now goes from June 1st to the 31st of July. So it's a month in 2020, month last year. And here's the Darwin again highlighted. You may notice that the general operation of these longlines has shifted north a little bit from 2020. So that's an interesting observation that we could go into perhaps in a question or in a side chat. But I'd like to point to one of the track characteristics here of the Darwin. Now you can see that this is a dashed line, and this dashed line means that there's no AIS transmission from this ship at that time. And you can see the time window at the bottom here. I'm just going to move the slider back. So the ship's obviously done some fishing down here, and then as it was heading due east on 11th of June at 2100 hours, turned off AIS, and it didn't turn it on until it reached this area back here. And again, by IMO regulation, the ship has to transmit AIS, and so the outage of AIS is another risk indicator. We don't know what the ship's been doing in between. The dashed line that you see here is an interpolation of the last known locations. And just to get an idea of this practice of turning off AIS, we in Starboard right here show these events in the track history. So the track history, for example, here shows the last port visits. So this was the 25th of March 2022, and the port visit the one after 17th of March 2023, and what has happened in between. So what we were just looking at were these events, these occasions of missing AIS data. So these are all listed here. We can see their date and time and duration. So this outage lasted for 5 days, another outage lasted for 11 hours, and another outage for 10 hours. So these are suspicious behaviors that we note as a risk flag. Just a little bit after that time that the vessel is here, has commenced its fishing, we see that there's another icon on the screen, and that's, I'm talking about this one here smack in the middle. This is an encounter symbol. So we've determined the when ships come together and are close enough for long enough time so that they could exchange crew, goods, and cargo between the two ships. And it's a common practice. It's a high seas encounter here. Happens in many places, but it is also a way to escape regulation and oversight by transferring one thing from one ship to another. And most of the encounters we see are between fishing vessels and carrier vessels. So carrier vessels, reefers, that would take the cargo from many fishing vessels, the catch from many fishing vessels, and take it on to processing at shore. In this case, this fishing vessel has met a second longliner. So we have the Darwin here on the left-hand side in our analysis panel, and it's met the Dayu number 2. And this is another Vanuatu flagged longliner that also has a WCPFC record. And just scrolling back the time, we can see that both vessels have been fishing activity roughly in the same area at the same time. And so eventually on the 23rd of June, they come together and stick together for 5 hours. And if I again click on this icon, it shows that the encounter duration is 5 hours 41 minutes. So this is within the accuracy of our AIS. I'll zoom in just to show you what this actually looks like in terms of tracks. So it's very obvious here that these vessels are so close together that it's easy to transfer anything from one to the other. Now, what happens after this encounter is we just go forward in the time in the time slider. The Darwin heads east, presumably, or we can see down here in the southeast that it continues fishing, and the Dayu number 2 heads north, drops another three lines here, picks them up, and then heads further north. It has another encounter, this time in another high seas pocket up here, just south of Kiribati, and clicking on it shows, okay, this has been an encounter with the Progress 10, which is a tanker bunker vessel, so it's presumably fueled up and heading back after this encounter, doing a beeline to be what looks like not home, because it's a Vanuatu flag vessel. It's supposed to be home in Vanuatu, but moving back to Taiwan and then South Korea. So again, we've identified a vessel here. We've identified some behavior that could include IUU activities, and it is now an analyst's job to determine these types of behavior for all vessels in that area of interest and make a decision on which vessels are most likely candidates for boarding and further inspection. So I'll just kind of recap what we've just seen, and we can go into more details in your questions. But we've looked at a very busy fishing area and shown how to determine some of these risk indicators. But again, I'm going to have to stress that these are just indicators of risk. They do not prove IUU activity. And this has to be done for all vessels in order to prioritize where to send inspection vessels and aerial patrol aircraft, which then has to go out and determine a proof for breaking these CMMs. And when that is done, legal action can commence and IUU can be proven. So with that, I'll hand over to Matt for some final words and to guide the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Maritz, and thank you for that. So yeah, great example there from Maritz. So walking through, filtering down an area, identifying patterns of behavior based on potential risk indicators to look at a vessel of interest and then potentially take that offline to do further assessment. What I wanted to talk to here, and I just thank all of you for all the questions that we're getting as well. We get some great questions in, so if you do have questions, that anything that Maritz has shown you or anything that's kind of popped up through the discussion, please put them into the Q&A and we'll go and answer those in a second. What I wanted to show you here and what you can see on screen is just a bit of a future view of how we're looking at a prototype view of how we're looking to handle some of these risk indicators within Starboard in the future. So if we kind of look at that, what you're seeing on screen here is, again, a similar view to what Maritz had shown you within Starboard. But what you're actually looking at here is a way that we're looking to automate and visualize risk indicators on screen for an area of interest or map an area of the screen that you're looking at. So you can see here, we're immediately grouping for ease, automatically any vessels that have one or more risk indicators of high risk or medium risk or low risk. And again, we're working with experts, published literature, and real world examples to kind of start to define and understand the level of risk applied to each of those indicators. But you can immediately see on screen, from an end user perspective, I can quite quickly see within my view whether there are vessels with one or more of different levels of risk factor, and immediately I can see all of the fishing registration and licensed vessels in that area as well. So we're in the process of ingesting all RFMO vessel databases into Starboard. So like the example that Marit showed you with the WCPFC record, you'll have all records of all vessels on all RFMO lists globally to hand. So we'll be able to do some initial analysis on that. And then what we're actually doing, if you just move on, Marit, is actually taking some of those detailed risk indicators that we noted at the top of the presentation and actually making them available for end users of Starboard to go deeper into their analysis and start to take automated flags of risk that we're generating and applying to vessels to actually then create their own bespoke views in terms of vessels of risk and parameters that they're really interested in. So coming back to that kind of regional perspective and the I guess focus of the conversation is not trying to oversimplify risk and get a silver bullet. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is really quickly and easily and efficiently visualize risk factors or risk indicators for end users to then start to build their own bespoke picture of the vessels that they need to be inspecting upon returning to port or actually within those operational areas. So just a quick view of some future states that we've got there. Now we have had a number of questions coming in, and I thank you. Some of those questions have been answered, we're sort of ticking along, so you should be able to see those in the Q&A panel. There was a question that popped up there around using other methods of remote sensing, i.e. SAR and other platforms in terms of AI instead of just AIS. And so what I'll just quickly do now is share my screen and show you what that looks like within Starboard. So yes, we do have that. We are able to ingest multiple sources of data into the platform, and we're doing that in real time, fusing that with vessel positions on AIS and then delivering that into Starboard. So there's a question there about what formats are you using in terms of SAR or other remote sensing opportunities. What you're looking at here is an example operation that we ran in the Tasman Sea looking for dark vessels. You should be able to see my screen here with Starboard, and you can see across the bottom here I've got these notes around some images that have been ingested. So if I go into that, I can see that we have a SAR image that's been ingested into Starboard, and what you're looking at there is about 225 square kilometre image that's been taken, and I can see then within that image that we're looking at potential dark targets that have been highlighted. So we've got an algorithm that automatically scrapes the image, looks at potential detections of the physical nature of craft within that image by a SAR satellite, automatically flagged, and then we go in and actually give that a manual confidence score. And you can see that that image came from RadarSat-2 via MDA as part of an example operation that we ran. So immediately I can start to see vessels of interest in my area, and I could also see that where we do have a hit here that's been automatically detected, but actually matches a known vessel position on AIS. So in that example, we've got a detection, potential physical detection that doesn't match AIS. It gets flagged. Same process applies. When it does match, we can see that, okay, it matches. We've got high confidence it's a vessel, and because it matches, I can see who that vessel is, add that same detail. And you'll also see across the bottom here, if I go through the time, we've got a radio frequency detection here. In this case, we're looking for navigational radars, so generally S or X band. You can see here where we've picked up a navigational radar, or the satellite has been picked up an emission of a navigational radar. We're noting that in Starboard, live in the platform, looking at vessels in that area. Where they don't match, we flag that as a potential dark target, and you've got some unique information about that, that navigation radar that's been picked up. Or when it's been picked up and does match a vessel on AIS, then immediately you can see I've got that same level of vessel detail. So a couple of quick examples there of remote sensing imagery ingested into the platform and then matched to vessels or unknown vessel potential vessels in the area. So some of that dark vessel detection work we're doing. Just going to pause the screen. I'll go back. Ritz, if you want to take over presenting again.
Sure.
So as Moritz just gets his screen up, I will
just have to unshare, Matt, if you could, please.
Sorry. There you go. Cool, thank you. So we've left a bit of time at the end here for questions, and go through some of those. So you should be able to see some of those in the Q&A panel, but I'll just do a quick recap. We had a question around some of the licensing and previous prosecutions and beneficial ownership data that's not necessarily shared across the board for developed and developing countries. And then, in terms of that, we are really looking at how we can build in more of that RFMO detail into the platform. So as Andy mentioned, we're looking at previous prosecutions for the TMT combined IUU watch list. We're bringing in more ownership information from RFMOs. We've got the S&P Global Market Intelligence detail and vessel attributes coming in through a partnership we have with Standard & Poor's. And then also independent research from people like CSIS, Monga Bay, Greenpeace, EJF and others that we're bringing into the platform to highlight potential vessels of interest or that have observed risks against them, that then end users can start to do their own analysis and kind of compare. So you're looking at global vessels of interest as well as some of the localized ones that are being pulled together.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot of questions, and our team in the background is busy answering them with words. It's I just noticed one. There was a question about, and we get a lot of questions of detailed definitions here. How do we define an AIS outage event? And in that particular case, the answer is that it's not transmitting AIS for 4 hours or longer. And those questions, I think, sort of quick snap, are really really straightforward to answer, but possibly not on the top of our head. We might respond to later with some details. So when you do have a demo, a trial account for Starboard, or you're a subscriber, you can find out these definitions very easily. So we're extremely transparent about how we define these events. And the same goes, there's a question here on possible encounters. Again, it's a proximity and a time criterion. And off the top of my head, I don't know the exact details.
I do, Moritz. I can tell you that one. So yeah,
awesome.
so we're looking at, when we're looking at encounters and when we're flagging that encounter, you notice we're not flagging transhipment events. So we're flagging encounters, and that encounter, so it's when two vessels have come together either within 50 meters of each other for 10 minutes or more, or within 200 meters of each other for 30 minutes or more. So when two vessels on AIS exhibit that behavior, we flag that as an encounter. And you would have seen in the system that logs the timestamp, the lat long of where that took place, the two vessels involved, and also the period that they spent together. So you've got a bit of detail there in terms of understanding an on-water relationship and the factors that have described that encounter. What we're actually doing, and some of this work here, you may see some indications for around transshipment events, like on the screen that we're showing at the moment, is coming in future releases within Starboard. So we're doing quite an involved piece of work to understand the factors and parameters that go into actually describing transshipments, and then validating that with end users and experts and published literature around that. Because I guess from our point of view, we are continually ingesting and trying to describe and validate behaviors that we're seeing, but ultimately we're working with analysts and a community of analysts to understand whether what we need to be surfacing to actually accurately say that that is that activity. So a lot of this work, a lot of this refinement of the models and the behaviors that we're flagging in Starboard is ongoing. It's continually being improved and validated. And I think transshipment is probably the best example of that. So we're very keen to not try and go and label something as something that we aren't 100% certain of. And that is one of the risks that we've seen within the sector, is that often you can be too quick to start pointing the finger at something, which suddenly throws up a huge number of vessels that you don't have any resources to go and inspect and actually dig into in more detail, and suddenly you've got a huge problem that you may not be able to get across, or actually the criteria that are being applied are not necessarily fit for the region or granular enough, and then you're actually missing potential offenders. So it is that real fine line, and I think from our point of view, we're looking to yourselves and the community and end users that we work with to help provide insights around actually validation of some of the behaviours that we're describing within Starboard.
There's another question that I noticed here that I like. How are longliner buoys associated with the relevant vessel? And that's a great question, because AIS feeds that you can purchase from various providers are extremely messy. And if you look at the number of entities, unique MMSIs in AIS feeds, there's an absolute humongous amount of them. But many of those are actually just buoys sitting on or around longliner vessels. And so there is no hard and fast way to determine which of those MMSIs belongs to a buoy and which to a vessel. But oftentimes we look at, well, in general, we have a framework to look at the name that is associated with this buoy with an MMSI, and oftentimes buoys are not named very creatively, so they could just have a number of strings. Sometimes they say a number of voltages in the name string, and indicating perhaps a default number or the voltage of the battery in the unit. And so there are a number of automated detection procedures that we run, but we also do this manually. So when I prepared for this webinar, several of those buoys, I just looked at, okay, so these are buoys. There's a ship with the proper MMSI number that I can look up, and the others would have unknown characteristics, and I would mark those, and then they go into the platform. So there's a bit of both, but we're refining our method to identify this automatically.
Awesome, right. So I've just seen a great question there regarding areas and RFMOs and smaller nations, and I just thought I'd flag that one just in the chat here. So that's a really good point, and we have shown examples around RFMOs in quite broad areas. Actually, you can look at any area within Starboard and set that up as an area of interest. So whether that's an MPA, whether that's small coastal boundaries, whether that is areas of concern for illegal activities, any area can be set to then filter vessels by, which is a really key point of what we're looking at. And I can see there Andy's also talking about the fact that we're working with Class A and Class B messages as well when we're tracking some of those smaller fleets. And a lot of the work that we're doing is around some of those high density areas and looking at smaller fishing fleets, particularly around the South China Seas. So it's a really great question. Josh also had a good question here just around, I think that's regarding the satellite imagery. And yeah, the SAR image that we're looking at is it's not too detailed. And the reason for that being is we're covering such a huge swathe of area. So, particularly in our area of most frequent operation in the Pacific, we're looking at massive areas of ocean that we're trying to find vessels within. So, the resolution that we're using for SAR, in particular for operations, tends to be quite broad, because we're looking at covering big areas. Hence, the imagery is quite kind of pixelated and chunky. But that's something that if you're looking at a smaller defined area, you can improve resolutions. You can go in closer, and I think that's just a reflection of the area that we're looking in. So yeah, you do have a wide range in terms of resolutions that we can apply. I also noticed another question around data sources that we're bringing in as well. So I think while we've shown you examples within AIS data and some of the RFMO databases and kind of combinations of that, we are working with multiple data sources at all times. So including oceanographic information such as sea surface temperature, wind, sea state as a layer. So that helps analysts look at some of those behaviours and potentially validate or query how a vessel is acting based on some oceanographic information, RFMO lists, and some of those, I guess, global vessels of interest lists like sanction lists or the global IUU watch list, or RFMO good standing lists like the FFA good standing list that we have in there as well, allow users to start to cross-reference vessels that they're finding in the areas of interest to them against a number of different data sets and sources. And then from a remote sensing capability, we're able to ingest and display SAR and RF and optical imagery from commercial satellite providers as well. So all of these data sources are being ingested in real time in the back end of Starboard, and then we're fusing them and running over our proprietary algorithms and machine learning models to provide the outputs that you're seeing on screen. So, who is this vessel? Where has it been? what activity is it undertaken, who is it interacted with, who are its flag states, where is it registered. All of that information is combined in real time into the platform, so you can start to do that analysis as quickly as possible, with a view to improving efficiencies and as we said at the top, really maximize what is quite often limited resources in terms of inspections and assessment.
Yeah, and then there's another question that relates to port state measures agreements here, and that's also a great question. How do we rate the different port states measures that are in place throughout the world? They're realizing that not all such agreements agree in their nuances between them, and how will we come up with the risk indicator that would rank those different port state measures agreements? And really the answer is, this is work in progress. This is port state measures are extremely important. They're there to prevent fish caught using IUU techniques to be brought to market essentially. And one of the most effective ways is to shut this down. But there's a range of effectiveness range of these port state measures agreements, or of these port agreements. Well, and exactly one of the reasons why we're doing a webinar like this is to field these questions and to hear from the community and find solutions on how to do this. And one of the principles of our work is that we present information that then analysts would use in their own context, and so where we provide the status quo of ports that have been visited and what the characteristics of their agreements are, it's then due to the analyst to make further inferences.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's potentially prompted by the image we've got on screen here. So you can see, a way of thinking of how we're looking to categorize some of those risk indicators. So, I mentioned the Ford and Wilcox paper earlier, that high seas transshipment event being a really important high risk flag. We've denoted that as high risk, as you can see in this kind of breakdown on screen at the moment. But then, some of those low risk factors, and again, coming back to how we see this evolving and being refined and improved, is actually looking at, in the future, how that visit to ports that aren't part of the PSMA starts to increase potentially in terms of risk, because it may be that actually when we're talking to analysts and partners across the world, they are seeing a rise in vessels who have concerning behaviours and potential histories moving towards ports that aren't party to the PSMA. And so what we're not trying to put out is a fixed rule and that's how it's going to work and that's where it's going to sit. We have to be able to adapt and evolve and refine it based on expert analysis and some of that published information that we've talked about. So continually validating that activity. Yes, there was a question there around VMS. Yes, we are able to ingest VMS data into the platform. Obviously, the examples we've shown you here are all based off AIS because of data restrictions. We can't be showing any VMS information, and that would be a country-by-country conversation. So yeah, absolutely. If there's any questions around VMS or other sources that we can ingest into Starboard, then yep, please fire them in, and we're quite happy to have a follow-up conversation individually about some of those opportunities.
Yeah, in New Zealand, it is now 10 to 3 in the afternoon. We've officially gone over time in our webinar. We're happy to stick around and ask questions. Some questions are still coming in, which is awesome. Just acknowledging here that that some of you may have to leave, but we'll be around.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Moritz. Yeah, we'll, as I said, we're quite happy to kind of keep on answering some of these questions that come in as we see them.
I think we're still at maximum attendance here, Matt. Perhaps we just close officially and stay on. We just want to make sure that yeah, we really appreciate your attendance and your active participation here. So this was really good. These things hopefully help us as much as they're informative for you, and we'll definitely keep them going.
Yeah, thanks, Moritz. Yeah, it's great to have almost 50 people across the world to join us for this short and sharp session. And as we sort of mentioned at the top, we really appreciate it. It's a massive topic. We're only really scraping the surface, but in the views of how we like to do things, it is and understanding different perspectives, use cases, knowledge and insights around the topics that we're looking to support MCS practitioners and other sectors in. So yeah, well over 150 registrants we had to the webinar as well. So yeah, will be a follow-up conversation in terms of sending out the content from the webinar. And yeah, as I said, we're quite able to stick on and answer a few more questions for those of you that may have them as they come in.
Appreciate the positive feedback and the wishes here from in the chat as well. So thanks everybody who's taking the time.
Yeah. So I've got a question here: detecting dark vessels, hostage transshipments, misreporting or non-reporting? Yeah, absolutely. So I guess from our point of view, it's again just understanding those exact behaviours or those parameters of what you're classing in terms of that. So I'm assuming that maybe around catch data. I'm guessing. You can maybe let me know, Jason, if I'm on the right track with that. I'm assuming that's potentially catch dating and the a really important element of IUU, to be honest. You know, something that we sort of touched on at the top there, that's not always a case of dark vessels coming in and stealing fish. Actually, quite often the underreporting is a significant problem. And so, yeah, within that e-catch data, e-log data, some of the other future feeds of information, such as you know, observer details and onboard cameras and things, electronic monitoring, are all in the roadmap of data that we're looking to handle and understand and ingest and visualize. So I guess from our point of view, it's just a case of understanding format of the data, how we could best present it, visualize it, and ingest it and handle it in Starboard. But yeah, it's a continual improvement of the platform. So we can talk about that in more detail. Question regarding logins from mobile devices. Yeah, so Starboard is a cloud-based app, works across all devices. So you can log in via phone, tablet, laptop, any browser. It's a secure logged-in environment and platform. And I'd just like to thank my colleagues Kelly and Andy, who've been furiously answering a number of these questions in the chat as well. So you should be able to see all of those answers in the platform as well if we haven't covered them off. Great. There was a question, I was just wondering if the person is still on that wanted to expand on it. Are we currently doing this for any of our customers? So everything that we've shown you and Maritz has shown you and we've kind of talked to is in the customer-facing version of Starboard. Some of those releases, like the future risk indicators slide that we're showing at the moment, will be coming or are in development. But yeah, everything else we've shown you is live in the platform and as assessments and analysis that you can do yourselves. Yeah. I think that kind of feels like we've covered off the bulk of the questions. If any others come through in the last sort of minute, and we'll jump on those. But in the meantime, yeah, I just want to extend a massive thank you for taking time out of your day to come and join us. Absolutely, for all of the great questions and engagement that we've had through the session. That's been really, really appreciated. And yeah, we'll circulate our contact details as well if you'd like to have a follow-up discussion or demonstration of Starboard with regards to your specific area of interest or use cases, or questions that you may have. We'll be more than happy to arrange that. But yeah, just want to thank you for your engagement.